So, hello. Again, my name is Richard Hannon. I'm the Deputy Regional Director for the Fish and Wildlife Service in what we call our Pacific region. And that encompasses the states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands. The reason I'm here is because the conservation of grizzly bears really is important to two regions within the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Mountain Prairie region, which is headquartered out of Denver, and ours. And while we have different geographies, we work seamlessly across those boundaries to affect the mission that the American public has given us, the conservation of fish and wildlife resources. And I'm here with Chris. I'm going to probably field most of the questions, comments about policy. Chris has been a long-time expert on grizzly bears and really been the face of grizzly bears for the Fish and Wildlife Service for quite some time. But I will try to approach Mary and broach the issue of where we are at from a broad perspective and where we intend to go. The Endangered Species Act has been likened by some to be an emergency room. It's the last stop, the backstop to prevent a species from going extinct. Oftentimes those species that are on the list have withstood hundreds of years of man's impact, human impact, and they've decreased to the point that it becomes questionable whether they can be sustained on the landscape. And so thus the Endangered Species Act was created, and species get put on the list as a result of that. The Endangered Species Act is not meant to be a permanent resting spot for these species. It's really meant to trigger action to get those species off the list, to recover them, to the point that they can be a part of that landscape in a sustainable manner from now on into the future. And as we look at grizzly bears, certainly they've been a conservation success. The Fish and Wildlife Service believes that the Yellowstone grizzly bear is recovered. I think, as Mary said, yes has gone on record saying that recovery has also occurred, and that a proposal to delist is appropriate, and I believe the IGBC has as well. So biologically, we believe this has been a huge success. So how do we take that biological success and manifest it into the policy arena, and how a species, and whether that species should be continued to be listed or not? And so that is really where we're at today. How has this success occurred? It's, as Mary said, and as the charter was read about, yes, there have been many hands that have come together that have gotten us to this point, to the point that we now have bears places that they haven't been for years and years and years. And that's a good thing. There are many hands, state agencies, federal agencies, NGOs, those that recreate in this areas, and probably as importantly or more importantly, those people who live here and make a living here and raise their families and work within the Yellowstone ecosystem. All of these people have come together to make this the success that it is today. So how do we take that biological success and manifest itself into the actual delisting? How does that happen? Well, one of the things that we have to do when we delist a species is that we have to make sure that there's that regulatory matrix in place that ensures that that species is not going to, that the pressures, the threats that once caused that species to decline, that those will have been arrested and those will have been managed on into the future, so that species doesn't end up needing protection of the ESA later. And so that's what we've been working on. So when a species, when a species goes off the endangered species list, when it's met that threshold, when it's met that biological, the policy, and those legal thresholds to qualify for delisting, the management of those species go back rightfully to the states. And the states manage them. The state fish and wildlife agencies are professionals. They go to the same schools that we went to. They've studied the same classes. They are just as eternally committed to managing those species in a thoughtful and responsible way. And those, once a species is listed, that's where that management authority lies. And so for the past several months, the Fish and Wildlife Service has had discussions with our state counterparts. If we were to go forward with the delisting proposal, what would that regulatory framework look like in a post-delisting world where ESA is no longer a driving force? And so we have had really rich discussions, thoughtful discussions, and very productive discussions with the states in moving forward. What would that regulatory framework look like? Those discussions, as I've said, have been productive, and we're very, very hopeful, and we anticipate that those will be concluded successfully in that we will, together with the states, have a framework for moving forward that would allow us to propose the species for delisting. As Mary said, there is no proposed rule right now that some people have alleged that there is, and that we're hiding the ball, but there is none. We had a proposed rule in 2007. Throughout these discussions, we're anticipating success. You go into discussions, you go into negotiations with hoping that you can get to a successful conclusion, and we have as well. So we've taken the old proposed rule and we've started to dust it off. We've started to look at it. We've started to see where are there holes, where do some of these discussions have to be plugged into that proposed rule. Because it makes no sense to do it in a linear fashion, do one and then the other. And so we're preparing ourselves for the successful conclusion of those discussions in a way that would allow us to create a timely proposed rule that could be shared with the public, that we can share with our federal agencies, those that manage the lands that have led to this success, in addition to the states that we have worked with so diligently. Any proposed rule, if and when we bring these discussions to successful closure, and we are very much are hopeful and anticipate that that will be the case, we would then issue a proposed rule. That proposed rule would go out to the public for their review and comment, and everybody gets a chance to comment. I've been in many meetings over the years of my career, and oftentimes people say, well, why should somebody in New York have the opportunity to comment on an agency action when they don't have to live with the results? Well, that's what makes our country stand out from all other countries in the world, is that we have a system of government that allows everybody to have a voice. So if we have a proposed rule, when we get to a proposed rule, everybody will get a chance to review it, to comment on it, and all of those will be sufficiently weighed. We also have a special obligation to the tribes. We have an obligation to work with them, to consult with them in a thoughtful and meaningful way that allows us to work through this kind of action and any regulatory action that we undertake. And we have had discussions. We will continue to have more discussions with them through this process. So we do not have a proposed rule, but we are setting the stage to be able to develop one. But it is not, because there is not one, there's nothing for me to share with you today to have a discussion about. There is also not a revised conservation strategy. So again, because it doesn't exist, I can't share it with you. So let's talk about YES for just a minute, Mary. So the service is very cognizant of the role that YES plays in approving changes to a conservation strategy, and we want to be respectful of that process. Accordingly, any suggested changes to the conservation strategy will not be finalized without the approval of YES. We are committed to working with YES to find a process that works for both the committee and the service in moving forward. In addition to review and approval by yes, we would anticipate that the signatories to the conservation strategy would also signify their support by re-signing a new conservation strategy, just as was done in 2007. And the signatories to that conservation strategy we anticipate would be the same individuals or the same organizations as was before. And that would be the Northern Rocky Mountain and Intermountain regions of the Forest Service, the Intermountain region of the National Park Service, the Central region for USGS, the state directors for BLM, for Idaho, Montana, and Idaho, and the states of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and the services, Pacific and Mountain Prairie regions. So that kind of, I think, provides a framework or backdrop of where we are at and what we have been working on. And Chris, would you like to maybe address the more specifics of how a delisting process would work?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. For the service to delist a species, we need to not only determine that the recovery goals, which are outlined in the recovery plan, have been met, but that the species no longer meets the definition of a threatened or endangered species, using the same 5-factor threats analysis that is used in the listing of a species. Those 5 factors include the status of the species habitat, the potential for overutilization, in other words, threats to the population, disease or predation, the adequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms, and any other natural or man-made factors that could potentially affect the continued existence of the species. So the evaluation of a delisting for a species involves a threats analysis, and that's essentially what a proposed rule is. It's a threats analysis on the status of the grizzly bear. As stated, the service believes, and the Yellowstone Ecosystem Subcommittee believes, that the Yellowstone grizzly bears are recovered at this time. Delisting them is a different issue, though. That's a process that we have to go through that follows this threats analysis. The service is currently evaluating right now whether adequate regulatory mechanisms will be in place. That's the issue that we're concentrating on, and that's our discussions with the states, trying to decide whether regulatory mechanisms related to population management will be sufficient to assure that the grizzly bear will not be threatened in the future. As with any delisting, the proposal to delist would be subject to scientific peer review as well as public comment. And I'd like to remind you that the grizzly bear was delisted in 2007 and was delisted for 2 years in this ecosystem. It was delisted in 2007 and it was relisted in 2009 after the delisting proposal was overturned in federal court. Now, the original district court overturned the delisting of the grizzly bear based on 2 factors: that the district court didn't think that the regulatory mechanisms were adequate, and the district court didn't think that we had adequately explained that the decline in white bark would not threaten the future of grizzly bears. We appealed that district court decision to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit upheld that indeed the regulatory mechanisms were sufficient, but the Ninth Circuit said that they too did not believe that we had fully addressed the issue of decline in white bark and whether declines in white bark would threaten the grizzly bear population. So the delisting of the grizzly bear really came down to that issue of white bark and whether we can adequately explain the reduction in white bark and how that would affect the individual and the population of grizzly bears in the Yellowstone system. As you know, if you've attended any of these meetings, the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team over the past 2 years has done an extensive analysis of how declines in white bark have affected the grizzly bear population. And that work has been presented by Frank von Manen, the study team leader, in great detail at these meetings, and that work has been published in peer-reviewed journals. And the end result of that analysis, as summarized by the study team, is that they couldn't detect any negative effect either at the individual level or the population level with that decline in white bark. So, as directed by the Endangered Species Act, and remember the Endangered Species Act, as Richard said, it's an active law. Our job under the law is to get the species delisted. The objective of the Act is to get listed species to the point at which protection under the Act is no longer required. So our objective all along has been to get to delisting. So as directed by the Act, we are considering whether to move forward with a delisting proposal. We've been working with the states, talking to the tribes and our partner agencies, and these discussions are ongoing. We're considering all this partner input in order to assure that the population would remain viable and recovered in the absence of ESA protections. A final decision on whether to move forward with a delisting proposal will probably be made over the next several months. It's important to recognize that any such proposed delisting would only impact the Yellowstone grizzly bear population. All the other listed grizzly bears in the lower 48 states would remain listed as threatened species if the Yellowstone population was proposed and eventually delisted. Additionally, any delisting process requires extensive opportunities for public review and comment, and the entire proposed delisting rule will be sent out for scientific peer review. Now, when we go through a proposal, the process is that the document is published in the Federal Register. There's extensive public notice that the proposal is available. It's posted on a website, and it's clearly, everyone will know where that proposed rule is and be able to comment on it. In addition to having a comment period, and the last time we had a comment period, it took 120 days. We had 120 days of public comment on the proposal in 2007. And in addition to that, we would have 2 public hearings, which are formal public hearings where there's a hearing officer and a stenographer that takes public comments, and everybody can get up and give their opinion and their concerns about the proposal to delist. And as Mary said, this is not what we're doing here today because there's no proposal out, and this is not a hearing. So if we get to propose to delist this population, we would publish a proposed rule. It would be available on a website so anybody could read it and comment on it in writing. And in addition, we would have at least 2 public hearings in the ecosystem where people could comment. At the end of that time period, we would evaluate all the comments and consider those comments along with the threats analysis that we put together and make a final decision on whether to delist the population or not. That process takes 6 to 12 months from the initial start, the proposed rule is published, to the end where the decision is made. And so that's where we are. Today we have not proposed it. We're still several months away. We're still evaluating whether we should move forward with this and how we should do it. And we have not written a proposed rule, and we still have the conservation strategy to revise should we move forward in this process. So that's where we are today. Thank you.